everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit for November. I'm starting this layout with this beautiful exclusive cut file that is available to all My Creative Scrapbook subscribers. It says Christmas at Home, and I just love the way there's that beautiful snowflake in the middle of the O. I love to stitch on cut files, but I find that if I just use one piece of paper, it's really not sturdy enough, and I'll sometimes rip through the paper when I'm stitching. So whenever I plan to put stitching on my cut files, I like to layer them up. So I cut the cut file with the cutouts in the word home, and then I backed that cut file. I cut out another cut file, this time without the inner cuts on the word home, and I covered it with glue as you saw, and now I'm layering the two together. And here I'm making sure that the two cut files are aligned as closely as I can get them. That way you won't see the second cut file from the front. To back the cut file, I used some of the pocket cards that we got in this month's kit. I used a border punch that was a small scallop, and I cut out a number of strips, and then I layered them on top of each other so that I would have a layered scalloped effect. Since the words Christmas and at were rather small, I decided I didn't want to stitch on those. I decided instead to use some texture paste to put some dimension on them. In order for the pattern to be clear, I had to use a very small stencil, or a stencil with very small openings. So I had this stencil in my stash that is a tiny dot, and I used this in order to create the texture on these words. This Heidi Swap texture paste is a little different from the regular modeling paste. It has a really nice sheen to it. So for Christmas, I thought that this would be a better choice than the modeling paste, which has a matte finish. I put those words aside to dry. I cut out yet another cut file, again without those inner cuts. I'm covering this with some green Distress Oxide in pine needles, and I'm going to place this behind the cut file and slightly offset it. This will help the cut file to pop up off the background. I always like to have some contrast, especially with the title. I really never want someone to be straining to read my title. And I could have used acrylic paint, or I could have used sprays. There are a lot of different things that I could have used in order to make this cut file green, but since I had the Distress Oxide handy, I used that and I was happy with the results. You'll see in a little while that only a very tiny bit of this cut file is going to show. It's just to add that little bit of green and contrast, and I think that it's worth it even though it's not very visible. And I had to go over this background a couple of times just to make sure that it would be dark enough. When I was done inking the cut file, I brought back my backed cut file, and now I have completed the stitching on it. I used some pink embroidery floss. I used all 6 strands, and then I put some glue on the back of that, and now I'm attaching it down to the green cut file, and you could see that I just slightly offset it, just enough so you could see the green shadow behind it. The modeling paste or texture paste that I used on the words Christmas and at is now dry. So I'm putting some glue on the cut file, and I'm going to be layering those pieces on top of the ones that are already on the cut file. And once again, I want to be very careful about making sure that everything is lined up, because once it's dry, there's no fixing it or readjusting it. So I do spend a little bit of time whenever I'm layering 2 cut files on top of each other, making sure that everything is lined up. I'm going to be using this beautiful piece of pattern paper from this month's kit. I have a photo of my 2 daughters from Christmas Eve a couple of years ago. I matted that first on some white cardstock, and then I matted again on some red cardstock from my stash. I put some fun foam behind the photo that helps it to pop up a little bit from the background, just gives it a little bit of dimension. And then I put some ATG adhesive on the back of it. That will hold it down temporarily, but I always like to go back in with some wet glue when I'm all done with the layout, just to make sure that it stays there permanently. And that's only because there's foam on the back of the photo. If it was just paper, I wouldn't have to reinforce anything, but because there's foam, glue I think is the best way to attach that down permanently to your layout. Now the major elements are in place and I can start embellishing the layout. I have a number of chipboard pieces and then some of the die cut pieces. I also took one of the pattern papers that was in this month's kit. It was full of poinsettias and I fussy cut all of the poinsettias out. Some were pink and some were red, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do that and use up the whole piece of paper, but I ended up using those poinsettias, every last one of them, on several layouts. So those really came in handy. I have a chipboard Santa on the letter H. There's also a little chipboard piece that says Merry Christmas under the photo. I have some die cut banners on the letter M. One says Merry and Bright. One says Holly Jolly and Merry. I inked the edges of the pink poinsettias with some distress ink in Vintage Photo, just to give them a little bit of contrast with the background, because the background is pink and so are the poinsettias. On the left-hand side of the bottom of the layout, you could see that on the bottom of the paper, there are poinsettias, there are peppermints, there are lots of images, and I wanted to continue that all the way across the bottom of the pattern paper. So I used a number of the embellishments in the kit and the fussy cut pieces to continue that. I used some poinsettias that I had fussy cut, and I just needed little bits of them visible underneath the photo. My goal was to make the two sides come together. So I was thinking that since there was a deer on the left-hand side, I would put a deer on the right-hand side. I brought in some of the die cut gifts. Since there were some on the left, I thought that I could put some on the right as well. Before I attached anything down on the bottom, I went back to the cut file and I continued to embellish. I'm using the pink and the red poinsettias. I especially like the way the red poinsettias are very noticeable and they match with the other red poinsettias that are printed on the pattern paper. The pattern paper that had the poinsettias on it also had a lot of ornaments, so I fussy cut those out too, and I have been incorporating those on my scrapbooking layouts. So right now I have two ornaments, one blue and one red under the letter O. I wanted to add some photo corners because I always love to add photo corners to my layout. So I am punching the photo corners out of some pink paper using an EK Success Scalloped photo corner punch that I love to use. And I'm going to attach those down in a little bit. And now I'm attaching down the Santa. Since he was resting on the cut file, I had to put a little foam on the left so that he would sit correctly on the page. Then I went to attach down the red poinsettia over the letter O, and I decided that I didn't want a red poinsettia there. I wanted something a little more subtle, so I went for the pink poinsettia. I inked it with the distress ink, and I didn't even take out my distress ink pad. I'm just using whatever is on the dauber because I do use that dauber quite a bit. I'm placing those frames over the M. I wasn't sure if I should put both of them. Normally I would just put one, but I was thinking that there was room for both of them, and I liked the way it looked having the two banners layered on top of each other. I love that red peppermint. That's a chipboard piece that's in the center of the letter O. I'm so sorry, the bottom inch of the layout isn't visible at this time, but don't worry, it will be visible again a little bit later in the layout. What I'm doing now is I'm popping up one of the gifts that I'm going to put on the bottom of the layout on some foam. I ended up including a lot of the chipboard and die cut gifts on the bottom of the layout. And now I'm ready to attach down some of those elements that I had just placed on the bottom of the layout. I'm attaching down the poinsettias at the very bottom. I'm going to include a peppermint, and ultimately I just have that red gift that's on the right-hand side. I don't include the blue one that's there right now. Since I wanted to include this little deer and I wanted it to look like the deer on the other side of the photo, I decided to trim off the white edging, and then I inked the edges of the deer so that it would contrast with the background. I really love this pattern paper. It reminds me of when I go to a Christmas store or like Macy's at Christmas, and there's just Christmas everywhere. There's Christmas trees, there's Christmas ornaments, there's things hanging above, every single thing all around you is Christmassy, and I feel that from this paper. The bottom is lined with all kinds of Christmas related flowers and gifts, and I just get that feeling of just like a Christmas wonderland from this piece of pattern paper. I really love it. I did work for a while on the bottom of the layout, trying to arrange all of the pieces so that I liked the way they looked, and I thought that they looked balanced. I'm now attaching down those photo corners. I like to use ATG adhesive because I don't like to put wet adhesive on my photos. So the ATG will hold those photo corners down, but I don't have to worry about messing up my photo. I had a couple of little bows in my stash, and I thought that this pink bow would look kind of cute on the reindeer. So I temporarily attached it down with some ATG adhesive. But again, if I decide that I like it, I will go back in with some glue and I will glue that down. Now I'm working on the ornaments. I pop them up on some foam to give them a little bit of dimension. And then I go back down and start working on the bottom again. I popped up one of the gifts on some foam. I like the way that red bow looked on top of the letter O. That looks like an ornament, so I went ahead and glued that right down to the layout. And then I was thinking that I wanted to add a little bit of balance with the poinsettias on the right-hand side of the photo. So I included some on the left-hand side of the photo, and I like the way that balanced out the poinsettias and the embellishments around the photo. So I put some adhesive on the back of the poinsettias and I tucked them behind the photo. So the whole layout looks pink and red with a few touches of blue. When I chose the color for the leaves that I almost always add to my layouts, I decided to go with a traditional green. I think that green and red are a fantastic combination, so I thought that that would be the best choice here, and that would help to diversify the palette of colors that I'm using on the layout. And I should mention that green and red are complementary colors on the color wheel, so naturally they are a good complement to each other. To make the leaves, I used a Martha Stewart punch, that's the one that has 2 leaves, and I used a McGill punch, that's the one that has 3 holly leaves, and then I embossed them with some Moxy embossing powder in metallic evergreen, and I embossed them twice so they would have a little bit more dimension and a little bit more coverage. Once I had them in place, I glued them down off camera, and that completes this layout, and here are some close-ups. Thank you very much for watching this video, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. If you would like to check out the limited edition kit or any of the other My Creative Scrapbook kits, you can take a look in the description box where you'll see the link to the My Creative Scrapbook website. In November and December, we always get a really gorgeous Christmas kit. So if you need to scrapbook some of your Christmas photos, this is a great time to join My Creative Scrapbook. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I will be back again with another video soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.